when you were thank you for the question. When you were in Bergen Belsen, was there anybody who showed you any sort of compassion or kindness?
Compassion.
Compassion.
Well, unfortunately, the motto of the SS was don't show any compassion because it's a sign of weakness. And they exercised this saying. So there was no compassion. And these women, they were ruthless. I mean, we saw them beating inmates and they were only young women. And anytime they would pass any inmate, they had to stand to attention. Yet we were in the part where the sick women were. So they were just crumpled down and they couldn't even stretch. And if they didn't stand to attention, they just lashed out and beat them. They fell on the ground and then they would kick them. Whether they survived or not, we don't know. But we saw this happening all the time, every day. But there was one moment that I have to mention, and that was when we arrived there. Of course, it was in November, and then Christmas was coming, and we had sort of a leader in the group. It was a girl. She was 15-year-old, and I remember her very well, and she wanted to get some favors from these young SS woman, and she went out and she broke a branch from one of these trees, and we made a little a Christmas tree with colored papers and things. And I think she also obtained some kind of a present from one of the people that brought with it, and no value for us anyway. And she taught us the Silent Night to sing. And that morning, on Christmas morning, when the woman came, the SS woman, we were standing around the tree and we sang the Silent Night. She was, of course, absolutely surprised. She couldn't believe what she saw. And then she stood among the kids and she put her hand on one of the heads of the kids. And that was a moment, that the only time that I any time saw that it actually touched a nerve of this SS woman, but this was the only time that it happened. Otherwise, that they were very cruel. We had experienced that one of the women in the hut misbehaved in some way or another. I can hardly even remember what she did. She was taken out of the hut, and we had to start in a half of a circle like that, and she started to beat her up, and then on the ground she was being kicked. I don't even know if she survived this woman from the beating. This woman, this SS woman, was only in her 20s. The woman that she beat up could have been her mother. So they were worse than the man. They were very cruel. Yeah.
Can you just talk a little louder? Did the Holocaust strengthen or weaken your faith?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not very religious, and of course, it is something. I mean, as a child, I wouldn't have sort of understood very well what was happening around me, but there were people that were praying. I saw people praying. They were praying every day, and they were praying to the God, and He never appeared. And you know, that's left an impression. But at the same time, I respect religious people. I go occasionally to the synagogue. I have there a very expensive chair that I pay every year for it. I never use it. And I'm sort of traditional Jew. I kept the Sabbath, and I do a grace every Friday evening. I have the family around, but I'm not a religious person. And perhaps one of the reasons is that what I experienced when we needed the God, he wasn't there. So that did an impression when I thinking about today. But as I said, I respect religious people. Religious people, they have the gift of being able to accept much more than I would be prepared to accept, because in their beliefs they have a little outlet that they can say that it's God's wish, and it makes them feel better. So I have full respect, but myself, I'm not very religious. Yeah.
What was it like when you came back into civilized life again? Back into civilization after being in the camps?
After the liberation, yeah. Well, when we come back, first of all, when we were liberated, the war was still going on. We were liberated in April and the war ended in May. And afterwards, we were not let go because we were kept in quarantine there. There was a lot of disease and things, so they wouldn't let us go. They were afraid that we will be spreading disease out among the civil population outside. So it took a couple of months. I think it was towards the June, end of June, that we were collected. Buses came from Czechoslovakia, and we were taken to Prague. We were still kept in Prague for about 2 weeks, medically examined, before we were then led to home to Slovakia. So it would have been first time that I met my father, would be beginning of July. He didn't know that we were alive. We didn't know if he was alive, but we were reunited. And with that, the experience of Bergen Belsen ended. I never spoke about it for 55 years. Not because I didn't want to speak about it, I just couldn't. It was very fresh in my mind. In fact, 13 years ago, I lost my wife. She had a cancer, and she never knew what I went through. I never told her. She only knew that I was in Bergen Belsen, I'm a Holocaust survivor. I never spoke to my children about it. They only found out afterwards that when I started to write and being interviewed on television, radio, and of course when I started to speak about it. So basically I made peace with the past, so it doesn't spoil my present. And that's what I live by. I have these memories, but I made peace with it, and I'm always looking forward, so I'm able to. But still today, even when I speak about it, it's not easy. I'm reliving my life in Bergen Belsen, which is not very nice.
How aware was he?
The Germans.
How aware were the German population of what the
Yeah. Well, that is all the time this debates going on. I went to a special event in Trinity College where this phenomena was researched when German talk about, because most of Germans were involved in the war in one way or another, every family. Some people committed terrible crime, and it's something they know about and they carry and they don't talk about, and they always say, we didn't know. But of course, that was a total lie. The situation during the war was that the official media was not allowed to publicize what the German army was doing in Poland. But all these people, all these soldiers, they used to be let go home at weekend sometime. The German SS, the Sonderkommando, the Einsatzgruppen, which committed all these mass execution, and they hundreds of thousands they massacred. They used to go home, and they lived in little villages, and you know, in a little village you come home and you talk about it. You tell the neighbors and everybody what they are doing, and at the time they thought they winning the war, and they basically said we are getting rid all of these undermentioned, these beloved human beings, the Poles, the Jews. We are killing them, you know. And in the local papers, like you would have Longford, you would have a little local paper, and the villages or little town, they publicized it, not on the first page, but in the thing that this soldier came back and he talked about. They knew the numbers, the way they did it, everything. So that they could say they never knew about it. That's rubbish. The German people knew. But I must say that they couldn't do anything about it. Because there were some Germans that hate Jews, but very few. Because in Germany, if you were caught doing something like this, there were no two things about it. You were sent to the concentration camp, or you were just shot. So the German people had to do what they had to do, because if they didn't, there was no mercy. In Germany, you couldn't open your mouth. The fascists, the Nazis, you know, sometime when the German army would be marching on a main road, and majority of Germans actually hated the Nazi regime, and you had to stand and raise your hand. And some of the people didn't want to do it, and they would go and watch, look into a shop window, and behind there would be this Hitlerjugend. And when they saw somebody did this, they would pick him up, beat him up, because they knew he did it deliberately. So there was a terrible pressure on the German people. They couldn't do anything, really. Yeah.
How did you feel when you went back to Bergen Belsen?
Well, the first time I went to Bergen Belsen was about 2007 or
Yes, around
2007, 2006 or 2007. In Bergen Belsen, there was really nothing left there, because after the liberation, the huts in Bergen Belsen were infested with lice. I mean, it's something that you can't imagine. And they didn't know how to get rid of these lice. These lice were the creature that spread the typhoid in Bergen Belsen. We used to see them in the corner of the hut going up and down, and we were full with them, you know. So they didn't know how to get rid of these lice, so in the end they decided to burn the camp down. So in Bergen Belsen nothing was left. They burned the entire camp down, and they left their little hut. There was a small little display, very little really, to commemorate this horrific place. It's the largest cemetery that you can imagine, and there are 70,000 people buried. But in 2006 they built a museum and a teaching center, beautiful building with displays of all these things that happened, photographic exhibition, and then it's 3 stages. Before it was concentration camp, during the when Bergen Belsen, when I was there, and then after what happened in Bergen Belsen. And there is a big auditorium for teaching. People are German students are brought there, and you know, it's sort of duty in Germany. Every student is brought into concentration camp and shown and taught about the past. And when they opened this museum, I was invited as one of the survivors. There were about 100 of us that were invited. My brother and my cousin came as well. We were there all as kids, but we came there, they were all old people. They were all in the 70s, 80s. So we didn't know each other, but I remember sort of asking, where were you? We asked each other. I remember I was in hut number 208 or 207, and I discovered one person that he was with me as a kid there, so I met him there. And I only remember the moment that was the most difficult one. At the time also I started to work on my first documentary. I was a boy in Belsen, or till the 10th generation. And we were brought there by buses. And then when we disembarked from the buses, we went sort of on a slant up, and then eventually we ended up, front of us was this huge grass area, behind it the forest. And for us, this was a moment, they filmed it, and our faces like stone faces, because for us this was an open graveyard when we were there. All that grassy area was covered with corpses. Now it looked like a place for a scout camp, and you could only imagine children playing football and all kind of games. But for us, suddenly seeing this, it really touched us. It was very emotional moment, very difficult moment. But since then I was also invited, first of all I was invited to give a testimony in Bergen Belsen to the archive, which lasted 6 hours testimony. And I also gave a lecture in the auditorium there to German students. And you know, it was the normal way as I give a lecture like I give here. But the difference, of course, was that when it comes to the point here I'm talking about, I say, when we arrived there, this and that happened. And when I was speaking to the German students, suddenly I had to say, when we arrived here. And it was a very emotional moment for me. Even now, it still affects me, because just coming here was, I got in terrible trouble with it. So, yes, I was there several times now, because I did a second film, and I'm now working on a third film, which you will be able to see end of this year or beginning of next year. We are going to Yugoslavia, France, Poland, to Germany, so we might be in Bergen Belsen again, I don't know. But I was there about 4 or 5 times since. Yeah? Here. Okay.
So there's 2 questions. The first question is, what were you dreaming about anything when you were in Bergen Belsen or since? And the second question is, how do you feel about Germans today?
Well, first of all, it is something, a phenomena that it's not unique. But children that were in concentration camps survived the event, they survived the tragedy, or whatever you want to call it, better than the adult people. For simple reason, perhaps we didn't understand fully what was happening around us. What I know about my own behavior was, and that's what I was taught by my mother, because my mother was with me, my aunt and my brother, they were all there, that I was very, what we called at the time, apathetic. In other words, nothing interested me. You know, when we went playing, I would go with the kids playing, but there was no smiling, no laughing, no enjoyment. I didn't have the thing of a child anymore. I was, what we call today, I was depressed. At the time we didn't know about depression. So that's how I was. It seems that obviously I must have known it was a terrible thing that was happening around. But in the end, I never spoke about it for 55 years. And perhaps it's the way that nature protected us. The fact that I had it in back of my mind, but I never talked about it. Nobody ever asked me anything about it. I never thought about it. I never had any nightmare or dreams or anything like this since then. So I survived very well. I know I had to give a lecture, was invited about trauma. And it was basically, they were all professional people, and they invited me to speak about trauma of Holocaust survivor. And of course I didn't know much about it, so I had to study it as well, even though when they invited me. And I found out, which I couldn't have believed, that there are still today places, institutions in Israel, where there are Holocaust survivors that just can't live outside of the institution. They're still living in the nightmare of Holocaust. They go having supper in the evening, and they would hide the bread and food because they don't know if in the morning they will have any food. Still today, 70 years later. So that's some adult people survived with this terrible trauma, and that they're suffering still today. But I can say that I had no problem with this. As regards German people, I don't hate them or anything. Not only that I don't hate them, I think it would be an insult today if I would hate the generation of today in Germany, because they built a democracy, which is an example for all of Europe. So if I would hate them because they're German, it would be an insult. So I have no hatred as such. Of course, I can't forgive what they did, but not for this generation. They're not responsible for it. But maybe the grandparents or people that were involved in these atrocities, I can't forgive them. I don't know if you saw the film Close to Evil. I was even prepared to meet one of these SS women that was in Bergen Belsen. At the time we were there, of course I wouldn't have remembered her, but she was one of the people that was convicted in this trial where 49 guards were tried, and she was convicted for killing 2 people and beating inmates. This was testified by witnesses there, and she got 1 year for it. And I was prepared to meet her. Not that I wanted to forgive her, but I was prepared to reconcile. In my naivety, I thought she was a victim of her time. In other words, I know her life from her teenage age. I've researched it all. She belonged to the Hitlerjugend. She was indoctrinated, brainwashed, and whatever she did then, perhaps she thought she's doing the right thing. We never can judge other people. Who knows what we would do under the same circumstances. And I thought that after 70 years, she's a different person. She will meet me and apologized what happened at the time, but it didn't happen. She didn't apologize. And my surprise was that after 70 years, she still thinks today what she did was right. That was my disappointment, not that I didn't meet her. Yeah.
Did the possibility of death scare you, or did you accept that you might die?
Did the possibility of death scare you, or did you think
Well,
you might die?
Yeah, I know. Well, we saw people dying all around us. And that was a possibility. We only live for the day. If we survive the day, that was an achievement. And then you never could think and plan what will happen in a month's time or what will happen. And what we remember very clearly at the time, that we liked the routine in Bergen Belsen. As long as the same thing happened every day, it was all right. But if something was different, already there was suspicion. And there is one instance that I never forget. Every morning we had a roll call, and our supervisor would come. And suddenly, this morning, there were about 4 officers come with the supervisor. And they stood on the side, and they were joking and laughing, and we were there on the roll call. And we sing, the only thing we were thinking about, why they are there, what they are laughing, what they're planning with us. We already were suspicious, perhaps they're going to send us away from here, and who knows what's going to happen to us. So the thing that I remember very well, as long as the day passed exactly like the previous day, we were all right. But once there was something different, there was suspicion that something could happen to us. So also don't forget, at the time we didn't know that there were no gas chambers in Bergen Belsen. So you never knew from one day to another, and especially the adults, they knew about the children, old people and things. They ended up in gas chambers. So we had also some visit from Red Cross that came to visit us in Bergen Belsen, because they wanted to see children, they wanted to show the children and mother to the Red Cross. I remember at the time, day before, the inmates had to clean up all around. And when the Red Cross was, no inmates were out of the huts. They were